International Energy Agency's views on energy, nuclear energy in particular, and climate change. We believe very strongly at the IEA that the nuclear power, carbon capture and utilization and storage, and other clean energy technologies are important. I know that some of us like this technology, the other one favor the other technology. But we do not have the luxury to pick up our favorite technologies. The time is not the time of boosting our own egos, but to reduce the CO2 emissions. And here we need nuclear power together with other clean technologies.
The pathway with maximum reliance on nuclear power estimates a tenfold increase from 2020. One reason for this large variation is that the future development of nuclear can be constrained by societal preferences assumed in narratives underlying the pathways.
Why did I change my mind on nuclear power? Hi, I'm Andrea, I'm an engineer living in Copenhagen, Denmark, and this video is for every English-speaking friend or any person that I might know that just wonders why I'm such a pro-nuclear advocate. Just to give you a little introduction to my education, I've been studying energy and nuclear engineering in Rome, and then I came to Denmark to have a master degree in energy systems analysis, which actually covers also the economic part, the financial part, the techno-economical part of all the energy systems and how they interact between each other. While doing that, I've also been involved as an assistant in a company that was doing energy M&As in investments that happen in renewable energy all around the world. I am certified by Nord Pool as a physical and financial power market person, let's say. So I have also a deep understanding of how energy markets work, not only for electricity, but also in general on a financial standpoint. And then now I just recently joined Ørsted, which is the #1 developer in offshore wind technology, and I'm doing a commercial analyst job. So I changed my mind during my bachelor education, because there I had the opportunity to went deep into an exam that actually focused a lot on radiological stuff, on nuclear science and nuclear power for development and civilian purposes for power generation. So much that I also went with my classmate to actually visit a research nuclear reactor, and I took this picture of it, which is super beautiful. So I wanted to divide this video in 5 parts. The first part is safety. The second part is the environmental issue. The third part is about cost and the price of nuclear energy. The fourth part is in regard of energy security. And the fifth part is the need of nuclear energy. Do we actually need it or not? So first point, nuclear power is unsafe. This is not true. I've been studying it, as I told you. If I would have found that nuclear power was not safe for any purposes for a population or for my children, for my future kids, I would have not become a person that supported so strongly. Radiation is a topic that no one understands completely, mostly because you cannot see radiation. That's why basically everyone that has not an education about it is so scared about it. Look at the levels of radiation which are normal to absorb for a person on average on planet Earth. You can find it in this image. If you don't know what is a sievert, I would like you to investigate how much your body is able to not only be resilient against radiation, but also be reinforced by it. Standing close to a nuclear power plant just gives you 50 microsievert every year, while a normal dose for an average person is around 2,400 microsievert per year. And there are people also living in areas able to withstand 10,000 microsievert per year. So radiation is not something that we should all be scared from, it's something in which we live in. Nuclear power is the safest energy source that has never been produced in this planet, actually. If you see it from a number of terawatt hours generated, and you also consider accidents like Chernobyl or Fukushima or 3 Mile Island or any other thing that is related to the nuclear supply chain, then the number of deaths per terawatt hours are incredibly small. They're smaller also compared to wind farms, solar panels, because of course also in that supply chain there is something happening. There is actually a fun story about this professor of Imperial College London, Jerry Thomas, that was the person in charge, one of the person in charge from the United Nations to go in Fukushima and investigate how many people, to make an estimate of the impact of the accident on the population. And she was initially against nuclear power and became in favor of it after studying the effect of radiation from that accident, which is very fun in my opinion. There is also the problem of nuclear waste, which is actually an improper word to indicate spent fuel. Radiological waste can also come from the medical industry, the research industry, the industry in general, and actually has to be disposed as any other radiological waste. The point with nuclear power is that it produces spent fuel that actually also has a small percentage, almost 3%, of very high level waste, which has to be disposed in a different manner. If, though, you consider the energy density of uranium and how we can use it in normal power plants today, you can see during the calculation that the actual total amount that now today we have of nuclear waste, which is high level, is just an amount that fills a football pitch with a height of 3 meters. So if you would use only nuclear energy to sustain yourself throughout the whole lifetime, then the amount and volume of waste, nuclear waste that you would produce fits just a soda can. So that's actually not much of it. And also the death rate from this sort of waste is 0. It's never been recorded or attributed any accident or any death to nuclear waste and how they are handled today in any sort of manner. The reason why we have such a low level of death rate is 0 for nuclear waste is that the industry is so heavily regulated that it's almost impossible to do it. There are tests that they do on cask for nuclear waste, and in the nuclear industry with missiles, with airplanes, that's just crazily safe. And if you wonder if this has such an effect maybe on the surrounding environment, I would just like to remember that the Champagne region in France is hosting nuclear waste that comes from nuclear power plants. An argument that I really love about nuclear waste is that actually we produce waste in our lifetime. We're very dirty animals, let's say. So if you consider an average French person, it actually consumes and produces 100 kilos of toxic wastes and just 2 kilos of nuclear waste per year. Okay, and of these 2 kilos of nuclear waste, you need to multiply by 40%, which comes from nuclear power plants, and then 3% that actually is the high-level waste that we all very concerned about. And this high-level waste, the thing that I cannot understand why people are so concerned about the lifetime of this radioactivity level, is that after even the highest level waste, it would just last for, I don't know, 10,000 years, 100,000 years. Okay, perfect. Toxic waste stay toxic forever. So if you consider all the lead that is introduced in batteries, in solar panels, the cadmium that is in solar panels, or any other facility or product, industrial product that we consume, that waste actually stays toxic forever. And is it a problem? Well, we should reduce it, of course, but as long as it is handled in a safe way, according to regulation and standards, I don't see much concern around it. The only difference is that the IEA, which is the United Nations entity which monitors nuclear activity in general, actually is heavily regulated. So all the processes that handles nuclear waste of any level are incredibly heavily certified and monitored and looked at, because people are so scared and so concerned about it. Lastly, there are also new generation reactors that actually could recycle the high-level nuclear waste in the future, so that actually might become also a concern which would be non-existent at a certain point of our lifetime. Another concern that I hear is that nuclear power is dangerous because it can explode as a nuclear weapon. And of course, there has been an explosion in Chernobyl, which was not the nuclear explosion, by the way, and it could never happen again because the generation of reactor that is now commercialized is actually designed in a different way. But apart from that, a nuclear reactor can't generate a nuclear explosion, because the nuclear explosion, if you consider uranium, it needs basically more than 70, 80, 90% of uranium-235. And a nuclear reactor only has 3.5% on average of uranium-235 again. So it is really not of a concern. And there is also the action system of a nuclear weapon, which is extremely precise. You need a symmetric explosion to compress the fissile material that actually causes the critical mass to produce the nuclear explosion. And even if a small explosion is not contributing to the symmetric pressure on the material, then the nuclear explosion won't detonate. From a physical standpoint, this is actually nonsense. If you look at it from a plutonium standpoint, you only need a small amount of plutonium, like 60 kilograms of plutonium. But actually, plutonium needs to be handled again in different kind of facilities that a civilian or power generation nuclear plant. In fact, there are so many countries that have nuclear power but don't have nuclear weapons. And this is also because if you have nuclear power, the amount of regulation and monitoring that you open up to is incredibly high. So you just put a spotlight on yourself if you build the first nuclear power plant from the IEA, and everything becomes much more difficult if you would like also to create a nuclear arsenal. By the way, you can support me on Patreon if you like this kind of videos and you would like me to do more or maybe higher quality, or you can use my Revolut discount code, which is also in the description, to just give me a contribution for what I'm doing here. The second reason is the environmental reason. So there have been countries in the European Union while they had to decide if including nuclear or not in the European taxonomy for sustainable investments for private actors that were opposing nuclear. And some of them were Italy, Germany, Denmark, maybe Belgium if I can remember correctly, and Austria. Okay, and so the European Commission did something that, in my opinion, was actually fair. It just asked the Joint Research Center to make a literature review and analysis of comparing nuclear power to other sources based on the does not do significant harm to persons or environment compared to other options. And actually, at the end of this analysis, that actually is 400 pages, they stated that it is a sustainable technology if you compare it with other sources like solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, or whatever else. So it is not true that nuclear can only be stated as sustainable because it does not emit and it has the lowest emission level on the entire life cycle and supply chain compared to other technologies, but also if you consider eutrophication, air pollution, or any other kind of impact category, then it can still be defined as sustainable compared to other sources. This study received a reply, which was like 20 pages long, so like 5% of the length of the report. They actually thought that there might be some other research to do, but they didn't have any other competencies of the time sufficient to investigate further. And I clearly can understand that, because to have a look at that report and have a look at nuclear science topics, you need a huge amount of competencies and time that if you don't have, then you end up just stating 20 pages of nothing out of a paper of 400 pages. In fact, nuclear energy was introduced in the European Taxonomy of Sustainable Investment for this reason too. Basically, the countries that oppose nuclear power in the European Taxonomy for environmental reasons, according to the Joint Research Center, not me, they were wrong. Third reason is the cost. And here I'm a little bit of a geek of energy finance, energy costs, and energy system analysis, so stay with me because I need to explain this clearly. So whenever we talk about costs, someone comes up with the LCOE. If you have an intermittent technology, then it just accounts for the energy generated when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, but not when it is no sun or no wind. The LCOE was actually introduced when all sources were dispatchable. So if you compare it to this metric, you're not doing something fair, you're not taking everything into account. It is anyway true that according to Lazard, which is an investment bank that does this graph and this data, nuclear has become more expensive, both of overnight cost and financing cost. Although if you look at the International Energy Agency data for the all amount of nuclear energy and power plants that has been built historically, then we reach a very low LCOE. So it means that if we are focused on doing nuclear, then we actually can do it very cost effectively. So as the IEA also stated in one of its reports, the LCOE does not provide a complete measure of competitiveness. If you want to know more, I'll just leave you a link in the description. So what did Lazard say when they just receive as a critic that they do not take into account the cost of balancing renewables, of integrating renewables, of taking into account balancing costs, connection costs and everything. They came up this year with another analysis with the so-called cost of balancing or firming intermittency of renewables. And here we can see that if you consider also the intermittency and you need to install flexible generation close to the power plants of renewable intermittent generation, then the LCOE just skyrockets and it becomes as expensive as new gas plants or the most expensive nuclear plants that has been built in the US state. I mean, we have more complex and more sophisticated models to tell us this, which does not come from an investment bank, but in this case also one of the executives of Lazard just said that it is not possible to achieve 100% renewable everywhere. We just need more technologies and diversifying our portfolio, including also nuclear. So there are more sophisticated ways to look at LCOE, like system LCOE, which also takes into account the balancing cost, the integration cost, the connection cost. And according to these models, if you would like to stay under a certain amount of emission per kilowatt hour in your electric grid, then the cost just becomes more and more and more as just looking at the whole system, not just one technology or one project. If you don't include nuclear, which is a baseload technology. So if you do not include nuclear, the reason why it skyrockets is that you have to oversize and over-dimension the system, because of course you need to cover everything, also the baseload, with those sources, and you need to include storage. Another indicator is the VAL LCOE, which has been introduced by the International Energy Agency and also takes into account the diminishing return of intermittent generation. Diminishing return just means that if you need to cover all your consumption with solar, for example, at night, it doesn't matter how many panels you install more and above the ones that you already have, you won't have this energy if you don't install also some storage, some batteries. And we can say similar things with connections. If you would like to cover 100% with renewables, the amount of connections, of grid connections that you need to have to actually transport energy and avoid congestion of the grid, it's just incredibly high, and that cost doesn't come and doesn't go into the LCOE of the single project. It just goes in consumers' bills, so you would like to look also at that. Another indicator that has been introduced by the Houston Center for Policy, I can't remember what, is the LCOE, which actually considers one single source and how much does it cost to cover everything with that source and storage. Okay, so they actually found out that if you go from 100% renewables to 95% renewables in, I don't know, Germany or Texas, the total cost of the system halves. Okay, it's 2 times more expensive to cover 100% with renewables rather than 95. Of course, these are models. This is not precise. This is just guidelines. And even if you consider the decreasing cost of storage, which might become 90% less expensive, these numbers are still way higher than covering everything with fossil fuels or nuclear power plants. We need to diversify our energy system in order to have a total system cost which is bearable for everyone. And if you look at the consumer's bills, of course, this also gives you an idea of what's the difference between LCOE and the total consumer's bills. So why is LCOE so important for certain developers then? Well, the reason is simple. If you're a developer and you win a project in Norway, in Poland, in US, in Taiwan, then most probably the amount of money that you receive per kilowatt hour is not based from what the market pays you on the spot price. That there is also the cannibalization effect, and the project becomes more uncertain in terms of financial viability if the profitability is uncertain and it is based on the spot market, but it receives what's in Europe is called CFD. So it is actually a fixed price that makes the project more bankable. But this fixed price is not decided by the market, not directly. It is related to mostly political will. So if there is a strong political will, of course the projects, they are just more bankable per se. And the same things as for nuclear power. If there is a strong political commitment there and there is a very stable political government that would like to invest in the technology, the risk profile of investment banks to actually finance the projects just decreases. So, at the end, why did nuclear power become so expensive? Well, the reason is pretty simple. It's called overregulation. You can see that after the accidents actually becomes more expensive and it becomes more time-consuming to build. Let's say that we want to travel and we are scared by planes, even though planes' death rate are the lowest compared to other transportation vehicles. Then, if everyone is so scared of taking planes because they don't trust its safety, there might be some political willingness to increase the regulation in planes. And so maybe, I don't know, pilots can only take 2 travels per day, or there are some pieces of the airplane, some components that need to go under a different kind of review and a more sophisticated monitoring or some stuff. Of course, the ticket price for airplanes just goes up, and this also decreases the investment appetite from investment banks, from investors to actually put their capital and to make it productive somewhere in planes. Doesn't mean that planes are expensive to build. This is not competitive with other transportation options. Of course not. If the regulation is stable and the political will is firm, this does not happen. And this has been, for example, the case of Korea, which has had very stable political willingness around nuclear, a long-term commitment, and also just one utility or one entity that builds the reactor. So we have 25 years of gap in the Western world in building new nuclear power plants, and the ones that we have built so far, for example in Finland, are FOAK, so first of a kind reactor, which means that it's the first model that has been built, so it will require more time, and it will benefit if all the person or all the company of the same company builds other reactor of the same design, decreasing cost and decreasing the time consumption for it. So the reason why you probably have heard about these small nuclear reactors or SMRs, it's that the risk profile of this reactor are way lower. Low carbon electricity like nuclear, solar, wind are all of them are capital expensive technologies, meaning that the cost of fuel is very low, if nothing, or the cost of operating them, let's say. So if you put all money inside one basket at the start of the production, then it is more riskier because you have inflation and you have the risk of building huge projects, which requires political stability, and regulatory risk must go down, of course. Political risk, regulatory risk, profile risk, which can be the case of nuclear if there is the political willingness to do it and people accept it as a source of energy, which is why I'm doing this video, by the way. The fourth reason is the energy security one. Someone might say, okay, but uranium is limited, and actually we have to import it. It's not as solar or wind. We have the sun, we have the wind, regardless of imports. And that is true, but energy density of uranium is incredibly high. And again, nuclear power is a capital intensive technology. So you need so small amount of uranium that even if the prices of uranium increase by 100%, the impact of the kilowatt hour of nuclear power is like 3, 5, maximum 10%, which is very, very low because you put everything, all the money into the construction. Second point is that actually if you want to reduce the risk, you need to diversify the sources. And currently, we can see that many parts of the supply chain of variable renewable energy come from China, which is not exactly a free democratic environment or country, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't buy from them or we shouldn't include them in the energy transition. Just means that if you put all your eggs in one basket, then your financial risk or risk in general will just increase dramatically. And uranium doesn't only stand in Kazakhstan or Russia, but also in Australia or Canada, which might make it a more viable option to diversify the energy transition supply chain also in more free countries. Just check out Electricity Map app, which is a startup that has been built by and founded by a guy from DTU. Because of course it is all good to talk about the energy transition, but at a certain point we should consider also how much CO2 equivalent emissions countries are contributing to. Something to mention is that from Electricity Map you can only see the electricity generation, but actually the whole energy landscape is much bigger than that, because you also have heating, you have transportation, heavy to abate industries, and we also need to decarbonize that. So if you look at the graph of how much primary energy, which also includes this heating and transportation and having industries, not only electricity, you can see that renewables are very small in it, as well as nuclear, as well as any clean technologies. So to reduce the amount of primary energy, we need to electrify everything. And to electrify everything, we will make things more efficient. So the total amount of primary energy will reduce, but the total amount of electricity use will increase dramatically. And based on the fact that actually electricity consumption, or in general energy consumption, correlates pretty well with living standards, I would say that just to stop consuming is not really an option. Energy is a very complex topic, and the need to decarbonize apparently doesn't seem to make it less complicated. So if you hear of any news which contributes to spread probable misinformation on radiological safety, nuclear accidents, or something like that, just look at the numbers. In my opinion, energy source which is safe, it is environmentally friendly according not only to CO2 emissions but also to other impact categories. An energy source which can be cost effective with the right political commitment and with the correct public communication, and improves energy security not only because it's very highly energy dense, but also because it doesn't require too much minerals or too much grid connections, and on average is available more than 80% of hours of the year compared to, 20% of solar and 35% of wind. And finally, that can help us electrifying, diminishing the amount of oversizing of the power generation, or without trusting that another breakthrough technology will just pop out of nowhere, or just considering overhyped technologies like hydrogen or fusion, which would like to be in the game but actually cannot because the pipeline is not ready yet, and it will come probably after 2050. It is a little bit of madness in excluding nuclear energy from our European energy system, or in general from free democratic countries' energy system for the energy transition. I hope I gave you a clear explanation. Just give me your feedback in the comment, and see you maybe in another video.
The challenge for nuclear power to be a cost-effective alternative to other non-fossil generation technologies, and to deploy nuclear power much faster than in the past. I wish you success in meeting these challenges, because climate needs all the help it can get. Thank you very much for your attention.